Dominique Smith is a social worker, school administrator, mentor, national trainer for the International Institute on Restorative Practices, and a member of ASCD's FIT Teaching, the Framework for Intentional and Targeted Teaching cadre, and Corwin's Visible Learning for Literacy cadre. In addition to removing labels, Dominique has authored the Distance Learning Playbook for School Leaders and the Teacher Credibility and Collective Efficacy Playbook. Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey are longtime collaborators and recipients of numerous teaching and leadership awards. They are both professors of educational leadership at San Diego State University, as well as teacher leaders at Health Sciences High and Middle College. They have authored numerous books, including the Success Criteria Playbook, the PLC Plus series, and the Distance Learning Playbook series. And now let's get started. And Dominique, I'll let you kick it off for us.
All right. Well, thank you for everybody joining us. It's so great to see people from across the world and focusing on an area that we believe is extremely important. What we've realized throughout education, especially through this pandemic, of how certain things impact our students. And the big factor right now is we live in a world where equality and equity are huge, huge terms, and both bring so much to each individual that we work with. But when we sit here and when we start to talk about this and we start having the conversation around removing labels, we wanted to focus on the idea of equity, because equity is what we fight for. And why do we fight for it? Because we've seen so many times, as equality brings great things to this world, we hear too many students, parents, our colleagues coming into our conversation, into some of our meetings saying, that's not fair. And when we fight for equity, we're not searching for fair. We're searching for right. We're searching for what works and helps and supports every individual in any circumstance. So we've experienced a couple photos that we've gone through and we've said, okay, here's photo one. And maybe some of you have experienced this. You've been into professional development and someone said, we're going to focus around equity. We're going to build a new equity plan. Here's the photo that we're going to use. We have to build equity within our schools. I love it. I'm excited about that. But when I look at this and I see this photo right now, I don't see equity. Because when we look at this photo and we see this version, the photo of equity is not equitable. They're not a part of the game. There's a fence in front of them. We start to see, again, just this formation of boxes, which starts to label more rather than right. So we try to switch that. We try to figure out what else we could use. We pulled up another photo. And this photo, when I started to use it back in the day, I got excited about it because I saw something tangible. I saw these apples where individuals could reach and I could fill in the blank, their potential, the common assessment. They could be successful in what they're going to do, become the best selves of who they want to be. And I started to get excited about, I figured out what equity truly means. They reached it. They got there. But again, we got stuck into this category of these boxes of equity equals more. And that's not what we want. Equity, it does not mean more. Again, we are fighting for what's right for every individual and making sure every individual gets what they need or deserves. So we came across another photo and we brought something back because we saw this again. We saw equality, we saw equity, and then we saw reality. And some of us have been here. We've been in these pits of equity. We've been in these categories where we fight for equity or we find resources, but we don't look at data. And all of a sudden, we see a huge gap in our equity issues where the students that want to come to school or the students that are thriving gained more resources. We're given more tools for success. We're given more mentorship opportunities. And the students that didn't want to be at school or the students that didn't want to participate, they fall farther and farther back. I'll fight for this as a huge equity gap. And I try to tie everything under that equity gap. Where students are coming to school and our attendance gap, for our achievement gap, all those things have some type of inequity tied to it. So we said we have to make sure that we understand and we could teach our students, our families, and our colleagues what the difference between equality and equity truly is. So we came across this photo, and when you see this photo, this is exactly right. Equality is we give every individual the same. And as you see in our top photo here, that is not going to benefit a portion of our individuals, a portions of our students. They're never going to be able to start, finish, participate. They're never going to feel success because what we gave them was equality. When we think of equity, we try to figure out what's right for every individual. And we start to figure out how do we make sure that they get exactly what they need. And so when we think the deep, deep areas of equity, we want liberation. We want to shift away. We want to make sure there's no boundary in front of our student, no barrier in front of our student that will not let them have an equitable opportunity in our educational systems. So I'm hoping as you're seeing that, and you're thinking about that, as we dive into what labels are and how we have to remove them from our individuals, we should always be thinking and looking through the lens of equity and how that impacts every individual that we work with. So the big question is, how do you define it? And I want you to think about how you define it personally. But then I also want you to think about it in your sphere of influence. Are you living up to that definition? There's plenty of us that have seen, oh, here's an equity statement. I love it. I want to do it. But do we really live up to it? I also want you to think of your big sphere of influence. Does equity live within your school site, your school district, or your school community? Is there true equity happening? Or are we just placing another buzzword in our mission statement to say, yes, I said we do equity? Really define that for yourself, and then hold yourself accountable daily of let's strive to be equitable for students.
So we spent a lot of time here in San Diego with a group of senior administrators in the local districts. And we wanted to go from a general definition of equity, people treated right, people being respected, to what we really mean by equity. And it took us months to negotiate. It is not a perfect definition, but it's a definition that was collaboratively decided on, and it causes us to take action. The beginning of our definition says that equity recognizes that every student comes to school with a unique identity profile that is too often impacted by racism, bias, and bigotry. And these identities are complex and multifaceted. The second part of our equity definition is that equity occurs as a result of sensitive, courageous, and creative conversations and actions. That in addition, equity requires the distribution and redistribution of resources and initiatives based on individual and group needs derived from multiple sources of qualitative and quantitative data. And then finally, equity leads to engaged, inspired, and successful learners. And we had to spend time talking about the difference between equity and an achievement gap, equity and social justice. And what is it that we're trying to accomplish as an outcome from our equity work? Yes, we want students to be successful, but we also want them to be inspired. We want them to be engaged. We want them to have many options as they make choices to accomplish their aspirations.
So when we think of equity, there are big, huge systematic changes that are happening within schools. And we're excited about that. And we want that to happen. But we encourage you, as you look at your sphere of influence, do not miss the little inequities. Because when we think about this, there are little inequities happening daily on our campus that we kind of maybe just shoo under the rug, and that makes a huge impact for our students. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. We're going to talk about names. We're going to talk about just connecting with individuals. We're going to be talking about eye contact, the little inequities that our students experience can translate into their identity and agency. It can make them not want to be at school. And all of a sudden there are huge labels placed all over them. So we, as an organization, as a school educational system, have to remove the labels and stop the inequities in our big systems and all the way to the smallest ones that are impacting our students. So when we think of labels and we think of how students feel, we had a former student that this hit home for, and we talked about labels. He said, I have experienced this way too often. So Gio said, I have a poem for you and wanted to share it with all of you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Giovanni Gutierrez Montaño, and I'm a freshman at San Diego State University. Previously graduated from Health Sciences High, where I created a poem entitled Labels. Why am I attacked by you? Why do you think this is fine? Who do you think you are to judge me in such a way? Who are you to try to overpower my life in this way? You are society. You think, but you don't know. You see, but you don't hear. You assume, but you never ask. The simplest things that can change it all. But you believe what you want. You feed into the fake and forget about the real. You only see what you want to see. You see all the bad and ignore the good. You see the crime in the streets, the stories on the news. You only see what is shown to you. You are society. You have placed this label above my head. You are society. You have seen me. You see me for the color of my skin, but you don't see the innocence underneath. You see a criminal in the streets, a thief in the stores, a problem starter wherever he goes. You have engraved these labels onto me. You place these above my head like a tattoo being shown wherever I go. These labels were placed by you. You are society. I bring fear into another's face because of the labels that you have placed. He is this, he is that. You will never know because of the fear that you have been taught to have. Have you seen the hard work that has been done from the people with different colored skin? We are all different. We bring you many things. We bring you food, we bring you life, we bring you wealth, we bring you structure. We have taught you culture. We come from different places, you and I. But you still only see what you want to see. You are society. You will only ever see the bad and never the good. But even when we all stand up and show them what the work we have put in, when driving down the road, ask yourself, who built these roads I ride on? Who worked on these buildings I work in? Who helped this place function? Why do we have so much hate for the people who help us the most? You are society, and you need a change. We are all different people. We come from different places. We come together as one. No judgment, no criticism. Everyone equal, seen for who they are. We are equality. I am proud from where I come from. But you place this label that I always live with. But you will never change the heart of a proud one. There will be a day where you will no longer be this way. You will make a change. One day these labels will disappear. You will see me as me and not for what you see on TV. I am the change that proved you wrong. I am not a thief. I am not a criminal. I am not a dropout. I am a leader. I'm educated, and I am the change you needed to see. Thank you.
I'm hoping that poem hit home with some of you, and I'm hoping that some of you will realize that is exactly where some of your students sit. We have put the poem in the link. We ask you to share this with your students. We ask you to see where your students sit with this. We ask them to write their own, because we need to hear our students' voices and what labels truly mean to them and how that's impacted their life. So as he said it and read it beautifully, we have put it into the chat box for you to be able to work with yourself or with your students around the poem.
Perceptions are powerful, and Giovanni's poem makes us think about that. The perceptions that others have about him and the impact those perceptions have had on his life. So a few years ago, I was hired to do a training. It was on text-dependent questions, make it, take it workshop. And I was reading about perceptions, and I was reading about how expectations influence thinking. And so I was wanting to talk about perceptions, and this superintendent said, no, we really need a workshop on text-dependent questions. And I'm trying to like, oh, please, can we talk about perceptions, etc. At the time, I was reading a book on team building, and I was on a chapter on this company called Colgate, and Colgate didn't really sell a lot of toothpaste at the time, so they invented this portable dental floss, and no one would buy it. And so they started a campaign to change people's perceptions. And you can see that yucky stuff in his teeth and buy our product. And the next one, when you see this yucky stuff in his teeth, buy our product. You need it. This green, you have spinach in your teeth. You need to buy our product. And it worked to change perceptions. Perceptions changed pretty significantly, and Colgate made a fortune on portable dental floss. And I suspect most of you have portable dental floss, and 15, 18 years ago, you didn't, because it wasn't available. It's changed the world. Now, I'm gonna ask you to look at those same three images one more time. Here's the first, same one, but this time I'd like you to count her fingers. Now, my guess is most of you missed that, because I primed you with a story. I told you a story, and it primed your brain to look for evidence that was consistent or confirmatory of the story I told you. And as you saw in the chat, There are things like this hidden in plain sight all the time. We have to get better at looking at this. And those labels make us pay attention to things that are confirming of the label itself. Next one. Where is that arm coming from? She went to a really good yoga class, I guess, because boy, that arm is impressive. And then the last one, where is his ear? It's so obvious now, but it wasn't, because you were primed. And all of us are primed. In fact, it's a survival technique. It's just harming kids when the labels we use prime us to have certain expectations for them. And that's part of Gio's perspective. Teachers' perception becomes students' reality. What have we been primed for? What have we been primed to do, think, act that we need to unpack? And those labels force us into certain kinds of priming.
So when I think of labeling and I think of perceptions, I come to myself. And I put a photo of me and my father always now to kind of have that conversation. As I walk into the door as a proud administrator and I have a button-up shirt and I have my pants on and ready to go to work, no one would assume what I might look like outside of my organization. And what I've noticed is based on a look is how people will interact with me, the language they choose to say, what they will choose to talk about, what they believe I'm interested in. And most of the time, the perception is so far off. And I used to be nervous about, hey, what it might look like, but I'm proud of who I am. My dad was born on the island of Fiji, and he came to Hawaii and then came to San Diego, and he's told us to be proud, right? And so some of my tattoos represent our culture and see where it's at. But then I say, okay, if people might put a perception on me, it's on me too to be able to say, that's not 100% true. Now, we don't need to prove ourselves, but we need to be able to tell a story and say, this is who I am. So as I see my students, they might have a look, but I can't wait to hear their story to figure out who they truly are rather than me labeling maybe to what I see. So I just want all of us to think about that, think about people and think about what they might see about you or what you see about others, and understand there's always a story behind them. Let's hear the story. Let's know who they really are, and let's build a connection off that. Because if we put the label on us, we talk, we discipline, we act to the label rather than to the human being. So just making sure we always focus around that when we're going to meet somebody new.
And we've formalized labels in different ways as well at school. Much of the research on labeling comes from the world of disability, and we have lots of labels that are there, and there are ways in which we create funding streams so that we can support students. But those labels and the harm that happens with the labels occurs whenever we perceive those to be negative labels of one kind or another, that we believe that a student's disability label now somehow reflects what his aspirations are, what her skills are, and so on. It's those labels themselves and our expectations that go along with those labels that can cause harm to students. And as Keith noted, that those labels can become stereotypes. These become a shorthand for the way it is that we talk about children. Unfortunately, there are expectations, lowered expectations, that can happen due to those labels. In truth, labels can end up hurting students. We have to be so on guard for how it is that we utilize those labels in order to be able to get services, but not to inadvertently lower our expectations about certain students. Now, those labels that we have for students extend to adults as well. I'm a special educator. Doug is a special educator. And for far too long, We have heard conversations among adults where they define and separate their students, your students versus my students, even though they're in a single classroom, even though they are experiencing the same things. The special educator is identified and is referred to along with his students. The general educator is referred to along with her students. How can we ever possibly expect that young people are going to be able to bridge this divide when we can't even do it as adults?
As we focus there, the other statement that we are hoping that we can have a stop to is I don't see color. As we work with our students and we work with our colleagues, we do see color. And we have to address this. And we have to be open to this. Because as our colleague will say, if you don't see color, you don't see me. If you don't see color, you don't see what my ancestors went through. And so we are focusing here to make sure as we go through every label, one of the things we don't say anymore is I don't see color. Because when we think about this and we truly look at data, students are suspended, disciplined, and expelled at different rates. And we start to look at the data, it pops out a little bit more. We start to see numbers such as this. Black children represent 18% of preschool enrollment, but 48% of preschool children receiving more than one out-of-school suspension. We do see color. Our data shows us that. We have to look at the data. Another point that we'd like to make sure is very true, that Black students are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white students. Again, we do see color. It is in our data. And as we focus on our equity and removing labels, we have to make sure that we continuously look at data to make better systematic change. Because right here was the great thing, as you look at our, John Hattie's research, one of the things that says not in his research is teachers not labeling students. We're going to see a zone of desired effects when we stop labeling our individuals and truly get to know who they are. When we think about that, when we start to understand who our students are and we start to figure out who we are when working with our students, our explanations and justifications become the expectations we have for students. And so we're going to define that a little bit more of what expectations are and how that impacts our student body.
Well, and as Dominique had noted earlier as well, it's really essential, of course, that we are having those conversations about equity. However, as Doug noted, if we just talk about equity and we don't match that with action, then nothing changes along the way. It's also essential to understand that issues of inequities happen at the systems level, they happen in terms of structural barriers, and they happen at the individual level. They happen in very small, seemingly ordinary kinds of ways. It's those everyday inequities that we are all capable of being able to address, but we have to recognize them. Doug talked about teacher expectations as being students' reality. And there's a lot of research that has looked at teacher expectations and what those influences are on teacher expectations. One of the strongest influences is what that student's past achievement has been. We make decisions, expectations about students, sometimes before we've even met them, based on what it is that they've done in the past, what their grades were last year, what the teacher's comments were from the previous 2 years ago. We make we make judgments and expectations based on those physical and cognitive differences, but also on things like gender, race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, language barriers. We make those judgments and we refine our expectations based on that. We wanted to share with you a really interesting study that was done just in the last couple of years. And I love the title of this. How did that happen? Teachers' explanations for low test scores. And the teachers in this particular study were in grades 3 to 5. The study was done over the course of a year. And there were weekly professional learning community conversations that were happening with all of these teachers in their grade level meetings, taking a look at data, taking a look at test scores. And what the researchers were interested in was how it was that teachers perceived that data, explained that data, took action on that data. So these are big test scores, and they are also really importantly those weekly kinds of experiences that students were having. How did that happen? And what they found over the course of the year was that 85% of the explanations for why it was that a particular student had a low test score, a low assessment of one kind or another, were due to the characteristics of the student. They would say things like, well, it's about his behavior. You know, he just doesn't pay attention. She doesn't read the directions carefully. That's why it was that she did really poorly on that. They said things about the mismatch between the assessment and the student. Well, you know, he's an English language learner. What would we expect for that to happen? You know, he's got an IEP. That's always going to interfere with his ability to be able to demonstrate how much it is that he knows. They talked about students' home lives. Well, you know, they don't read at home. She doesn't get anybody reading to her. How do we even know that, right? Making lots of judgments about home life. Well, you know, nobody really cares about what's happening with her. She's in a big family, right? Making these judgments. Right, exactly, Pat. No one at home speaks English. That's the reason why. And they talked about established or suspected underlying conditions. You know, I think she's dyslexic. I think that's why she's not performing so well. Only 15% of the time over the course of the year did these teachers talk about their teaching practices, instruction that was going on in the classroom. Fully 85% of the time, the reason that a student did not progress in terms of their assessment was because of their characteristics. Only 15% of the time was it ever even suggested that it might have something to do with some of the instruction that was happening in the room. And quite frankly, these are conversations that all of you as educators know that we continually have with one another. It's the casual bigotry that happens. We use words like this. Well, that kid's hyper. Lazy, just like his brother. Or maybe we clean up the language a little bit. We say, well, you know, that's an at-risk child. She's disadvantaged. And these become code for what it really can mean, which is that we don't have very high expectations for students. Teacher estimates of student achievement are one of the most powerful influences on student learning. Teacher estimates mean not just expectations, all kids can learn, but rather that there is a strong and correct and aligned understanding of what it is that students are currently able to do and what it is that they need next. That there's a precision to those expectations, not just hope. Hope is not a plan, but rather that there's a follow through, there's an alignment between what those expectations are and what it is that that child needs in order to go to the next level. And Dominique, I know you're going to talk about some of those individual approaches.
Yeah, so when we start thinking about what can we do? What can we do to start taking off some of these labels? One of the first ones that we've always discussed and always talked about in our individual approaches is around names. Names are extremely important, and names have a story. Names bring out character. Names are easily mispronounced. So I'll give you an example. This is my princess. I get to call her my princess. I have 3 beautiful children, but she's showing up today, so that is my favorite child. So we're gonna throw it out there. Her name is Emma K. Noel Smith. I love her name. It's unique. It's different. She got Emma based on when my grandmother passed away. We have Emma, and then K because my sister's name starts with K, my wife's sister's name starts with K, and my mom's name starts with K. 3 women that would have an impact on her life. There's an E at the end based on the fun fact that when I told you earlier, my dad was from Fiji. I wanted to have a little islander name. This isn't an islander name, but all my aunties, they kept saying, just add more A's, E's, I's, O's, and U's. And it might look a little bit more islander-ish. And I said, definitely will. So I gave her an E. So that's Emma K. Noel Smith. I just wanted her to have a fun, exciting name. But when you think about names, I want you to think about, has your name ever been said wrong? Do you have a story behind your name that nobody knows? When I have my name is Dominique. And as people meet me or hear my name, there is a high chance that people might think I am a woman because Dominique is the girl's name. I've been told that a very long time. And so when I have that experience, it's okay. I'll tell people, no, if they say it differently, I'll say, no, it's Dominique. But I've had many people in my life call me Dominique. And after I've met that person for the 3rd or 4th time, and they continuously call me Dominique, I start to check out of the conversation. I experienced this at a very young age. I had a teacher that would not call me Dominique. They would always call me Dominic. And I all of a sudden said, okay, then let me introduce you to Dominic. So if I got in trouble, it was Dominic. If I did something wrong, it was Dominic. If I didn't want to do something, it was Dominic, because that's who you created. I'm proud of my name. I'm excited about my name. I want people to pronounce it correctly because I know that you're invested in me then. How do I show investment? Right off the bat, knowing your name, connecting on that level. I know names are hard. I know sometimes that we mispronounce it, but I encourage us, try harder. Let's practice a little bit more. Let's say, hey, did I say it right today or do I need to work on it? Because that's where we have that connection with students. Easy inequity is by mispronouncing a student's name because they do not feel that they are connected. At the same time, when we think about inequities and we understand what's going on, only 52% of our students believe that teachers even know their name. We have to know our students' names. We have to know all our students because students want to be seen. Students want that, oh my gosh, somebody saw me and knew my name. So how do we do this? How do we say it's important to know names? Well, I have an idea. We are going to take an old song that you all know, and we're going to sing it as loud as we can, and we're going to bring this song back into schools because it's important to say, I see you, I'm excited you're here, and I know your name. So let's sing along. If you're somewhere there, go ahead and unmute or sing aloud as best you can, wherever you're at, because this is our song now.
Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came.
So that's our song. That's what we should be doing. We should be knowing every student's name and saying it every day. Now, at the same time, I want you to think in two different ways. When we get back on site, or if you are back on site, our expectation should be that we say every student's name in our building every single day. Let's make that an expectation for self. Every student's name every single day. But if you're in a virtual world, or if you're in a hybrid model or simultaneous teaching, whatever it may be, let's make the agreement today that every student in that Zoom will hear their name, because they already feel distant. They already feel lost. They already feel not seen. And all of a sudden that shifts to an inequity that they don't care about me. Hearing your name is exactly right. It's magical. You want to be seen. And sometimes when we can't see each other face to face, the only way we felt seen is when we say someone's name. And the last thing I'll say about names, we have so many amazing children and students coming into our schools. Please make sure, if they have shifted their name to be Americanized, let's call their birth name back. Give our students their name back if somebody shifted it before you, because that is their culture. That is who they are. That is something that has been missing from them. So please, let's keep that going.
And I really appreciate that reminder of namedrop.io, that we can record audio for people to hear. As part of this, knowing your name, knowing who you are, being comfortable who you are, students need to know that we are emotional beings. We have a full range of emotions. And part of being who you are is to learn to label, identify those emotions. And I look at the slide and I say, identify. Well, it's how and we have a label up there. And knowing that you're sad right now is an emotion. It's not who you are as a person. And I think we've run this, okay, so if you're feeling this way, then we call you it as if you are it. Some days, honestly, I feel lazy. That doesn't mean people get to tell me I'm lazy all the time. Some days I seem super happy. I need to understand there's emotions. There are a range of normal emotions. They're part of the human experience, but they're not the labels of who I am. There's an elementary version of that, more complicated version, but knowing that you are allowed to have emotions. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be worried. You're allowed to be super happy, but that doesn't mean people get to label you because of that forever. Nancy tells a story every once in a while of her schooling experiences, and a student who chose a very specific kind of dress, the clothing, and the teacher labeled that student funeral and called that student funeral all the time. And how awful that must have been for that young person to have the adult in control labeling that way. There's a bunch of research called banking time, spending one-on-one time with student-directed activities so you get to know them, get to know who they are, what they care about. I love this body of research. Spend a few minutes, whether it's on Zoom or physically present with a student, have them teach you something. I learned Fortnite from a student I was banking time with. I didn't think I needed to know Fortnite, but it's actually pretty cool. And now I know a lot about Fortnite because of banking time. There are things kids can teach us, but more importantly, it's about developing a relationship and getting to know you for who you are.
So as we start to think of that, what else can we do as we have our individual approaches? What can we do as our classroom approaches? And one of the things that we focus on the classroom approaches is make sure that we are eliminating some of those shame and humiliation factors that are happening in our classrooms. I am a huge person to say, let's get rid of clip charts within our organizations, because as we have clip charts and we are trying to hold accountability for our students, these clip charts put a huge label on our students. I think about it when my son was through this process. He would start in the middle of the school day, and my son did pretty well. He would always go up, and up always equaled great, right? You did a good job in the class. You lived up to the expectations. Well, down meant you were a bad kid. Down meant you're the red kid. Down meant you're the contact home kid. And all of a sudden, it started to create this individual, this label of who they are. I've seen some clip charts, and Nancy will show you, that are just some of the language that is used on this is hurtful. This one we caught in the classroom. I am not here to learn. This is where the kid got to go today. They went in front of all of their peers and got to clip their clip with their name on it and said, I am not here to learn. How did we figure that? What was the assessment around that to say they're not here to learn? Maybe they had a rough day, where it was. And so these shameful and hurtful humiliation tactics stay with our students for a long time. They create a label around them. I'm the bad kid. I'm the red kid. I'm the detention kid. I'm the referral kid. But don't get me wrong. I understand why these practices were there. They were trying to build accountability for students to make sure they weren't misbehaving in the classrooms. It's our turn to take these down, rip them up, and use something differently. We do not need to shame and humiliate kids in front of their peers, because it just creates a label that hurts. And I tell you this, it doesn't feel good, because anytime you have like that little shame moment or kind of that awkward moment, like everybody's looking at me, we react some different way. We either avoid it, we run away from it, we fight it, whatever it may be. If you don't believe me, today, when you're done with this, get in your car, drive down the street, go to a red light. Let somebody honk at you behind you. Some of you, because you feel that startled moment, we might label that a shame moment, will speed off and avoid the situation. Or some of you will confront it, where you'll wait till the light turns yellow and then drive away, or you'll roll down your window and give them a negative wave, because that's how we interact with that. And that's what happens to our students. When they feel shame and humiliated, they either avoid the situation, avoid the class, avoid the teacher, or they confront, they act out, they push back. So please, as we are here, if we can, get rid of them. Now, if you're like, I can't, my teacher said they're doing it, we have to keep them. The bottom one is always rebuild relationship with teacher. The top one is always call home. I want when a student goes up that we call home for positive interactions rather than always clipping down and only calling on negative interactions. I want always the top to be the best, because I want to hear the positive things that are happening in school rather than all the negative things that are happening within school.
And, you know, I think, and I'm seeing so much agreement in the chat about how very harmful that is. The idea of shaming small people, we can all agree upon is wrong. But we also have to look closely at what our everyday practices are that we use at the classroom level. And I'll use grouping as another example of that. Now, all of us know, we've all gone to teacher school. We know that groups are supposed to be formed by assessments, and that we utilize assessments in a really frequent kind of way such that we can group them. However, walk into most especially elementary classrooms, and you'll find that the grouping is done one way and one way only, and that is by their current text level. What grouping should be, and I'll take the reading side of it first, what grouping should be is flexible grouping, and that we group kids together for lots of different reasons. Sometimes we pull a group of students together because of a shared interest. Other times it may be instructional in nature. There may be a group of students that we're focusing on a particular reading comprehension strategy. It's not the text itself that they're reading, but rather how it is that we're applying that strategy in whatever it is that we're reading. Sometimes we're pulling students together because we've got a vocabulary target in mind, or we're doing some fluency work as well. At the secondary level, we're making sure, again, that we have lots of flexible grouping ways so that students come in contact with one another. I can certainly remember many years ago when I was in teacher school, and one of my professors very wisely said to me, how do you know if your groups have been together too long? When you say one student's name and 3 other kids stand up at the same time. Those kids have been together for too long. We need to make sure that we are continually giving students opportunities to be able to mix and match with lots of other students. One of the tools that we have in the Removing Labels book, and there are 40 tools that are in there, is about doing a sociogram, the relationships that are happening among the students in your classroom in order to be able to foster new ways for students to be able to create those social relationships. Who are those students that are marginalized by others in your classroom? Do you know who that is? Do you know how to address it? There are estimates that something on the order of about 70% of what happens in our classrooms are not witnessed by adults. They are not seen by adults. That there's a current that's in the classroom that we are often not aware of. We want to be sure about how it is that we're grouping students together. As I noted earlier, text difficulty levels, not an especially good way to be able to group kids together. In fact, those levels themselves have come under quite a bit of criticism through more current research as well. How about instead that there are times maybe when we group kids by dispositions? For example, writing disposition. Hey, I'm an English teacher, so that's where it is that I'm going to come from. What's a group's level of confidence, for example, about their writing, or their persistence, or their passion? There are lots of different ways that we can pull students together. We can use alternative ranking systems, another tool that we have in the book, of being able to pair up to group students together such that you are maintaining heterogeneous groups, very important to be able to do, but at the same time, making it possible for those groups to work together as student learning communities. That's what SLC means. I want a student learning community. I just don't want a table with 4 students that are sitting at it. For those of you that use centers or stations of one kind or another, where you're doing some teacher-directed instruction, you don't need to keep those kids together the entire time, but rather what you can do is pull students who have a similar set of skills or needs or interests to be able to participate with you, and then send them back into those groups and pull another group of students, and so on. And so on. That way we maintain the heterogeneity of those groups while still having opportunities to homogeneously group students based on skills, based on needs, based on interest.
As we're thinking about this too, I want you to think, and just join in the chat. Thank you for being a part of the chat today. But when you think of the word trauma, what's the one word you think of? Let's just throw those in the chat box right now. When you hear or think of the word trauma, what's that word you think of? We have harm, we have abuse, ACE is fear, pain, memory, trauma, insecurity, abuse, frozen. All those words, right? Those are what our students live with. So as you were writing these words and those words that we hear, I also want you to think of this question. I want you to think, when you think of trauma, what's the one student you think of? Now, I don't want you to write their name in the box, but I want you to think of that student. And I want you to think, what labels come with that student? What happens with that student? And what can we do to support that student? Remove that label off that student, support and understand who they are. And one of the things that we like to look at and examine into our own classrooms is making sure that when you go into the classroom that we have a trauma-sensitive class design. And one of the best examples that really hit home to me is we have a lot of students entering our classrooms that have to know or have to be by the exit. They have to see it. They have to be close to it. Getting to know our students, understanding who they are, and maybe understanding that there are some students that are dealing with trauma. Instead of putting them far away from the exit and dealing with maybe their emotions, their anxiety, all the things that are happening because they're so far away from the door, let's get to know them. Let's move them closer. Let's remove that label and say, you're right here. Here are some tools. Here are some things to make this a better classroom for you.
We'll talk about just one more of those 40 tools that we have in the Removing Labels book, and that's around Jigsaw. Jigsaw famously was developed in the early 1970s by Elliot Aronson, and he was brought into an elementary school that had recently been under a desegregation court order, and there were lots of tensions that were happening at this school, and he and his graduate students were brought in because what teachers were finding is that even though there were students that were in the classroom, they seemed to self-divide. There wasn't a lot of interaction going on. They developed Jigsaw as a way to be able to bridge what those experiences were. And with Jigsaw, as many of you know, the idea behind it especially is that student groups become dependent on one another in order to be able to master some material. It creates those opportunities that students have to be able to rely on one another, not just to rely on that teacher, but to actually rely on one another. I'll say one more thing about Jigsaw before we move into that last section around school-wide approaches, and that's it. What is often left off is the last step in Jigsaw, which is when you bring that expert group back together a second time to be able to talk about what it is that they understand about their expert topic now that they have learned from their classmates as well. We want to create those opportunities for interdependence to happen in the classroom. Dominique, you're going to talk about school-wide approaches.
So when we think about school-wide approaches, as our leaders, as our sphere of influence, what can we do to help remove labels off students as a whole school? First and foremost, there's a little bit here, surveys, understanding exactly surveys in the book, making sure that we have surveys that are getting the vibe, getting the sense, getting the heart of our organization. Always great to look at data and see exactly where we're at. Secondly, we have to, and I think some of us can agree, our first experience, and that's usually, if we're not outside, our front desk, it has to be a welcoming environment, because there are students that show up late that are told that they are bad, that they are, I don't know why we do it, but grown adults, when a student shows up late, they always want to remind a student, you're late. And the student always wants to say, I know. My iPhone 12 told me, thank you. But we just have to have that welcoming environment for anybody that walks into our organization, because that's the first place, and that's a place that can really label individual, oh, here's the late kid again, or oh, here's the kid that's sick again, or oh, here's this individual. We just have to make sure that we have a very warm and welcoming front office. The other thing that we can do as an organization, as a team, is really go through and understand who our students are. And how many students do we truly see and have relationships with? So the dot inventory has been a thing that we've done. Some of our colleagues on this call have seen this and done this with us. What we do is you make sure you write down every single student's name in your school. Go to your gymnasium, put every student, however many grades you have in your campus, put them all over the wall. Then you're going to go to every teacher and you're going to give them a stack of stickers, and you're going to say, go put that dot or the sticker next to a student you have a relationship with. That's all you're going to say, that you have a relationship with. Let that teacher identify what a relationship truly means. And all of a sudden, people are walking around and telling stories about students and laughing and giggling and tears, because I remember when this student was in 7th grade and now I have him in 12th grade, or I remember this kid in 1st grade and now I have him in 3rd grade. We're telling the positive stories. But then we take a step back, we reflect, and we see how many students do not have a sticker. How many students sit right at the radar or under the radar that have never been seen, or some adult says somebody else will put a sticker there. I'm not going to put a sticker there right now. And all of a sudden we understand that there are students that have a label of saying, I'm nobody, or I'm not seen, or who am I? And every student has the right to feel that one adult on their campus knows them more than just the surface level. So we can start to connect and say, hey, we're here for you.
Hope is not a plan. At each of these levels, at the individual level, the classroom level, and at the school-wide level, we have tools that are there for you to be able to collect data and take action. This is an example of one of the school-wide tools that's there. How is it that we are creating those opportunities for not only proposed actions, but let's follow it all the way through with a logic model? What are the internal supports that we need, the external supports that we need, and how is it that we're going to monitor our progress so that we can continue to be able to refine and revise? Equity requires action. We can't just simply admire the problem and then go on with what it is that we've done. Here we are at an opportunity to be able to reconceive and reimagine school. Let's start at this place with making sure that we're creating equitable environments that allow all children to be able to reach their aspirations.
As you walk your building, as we go back into our buildings, the best way to remove a label off students is make sure they feel loved. Make sure that they know that they are beautiful, that they matter, that they are part of a family, that they have someone looking over them. And any blank space you have, let's fill it up. So we put 2 quick photos up from our school here. The photos, everywhere they go, there's going to be a statement. There's going to be a saying, you matter, you're beautiful, you're enough, we breathe together, because that's what it's all about.
And you matter too. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dina, because Dina, I know you have some winners.
Yeah, we'll quickly get through this. So thank you. What a great, powerful presentation and great next steps for all of us as we move forward in breaking the cycles of labeling. So again, thank you very much to Doug Fisher, Nancy Frey, and Dominique Smith, who graciously gave their time to make this event available for each of us. And another reminder that this webinar was recorded, and you'll be receiving the recording and your certificate of attendance in the next couple of days via your email. So our lucky winners of removing labels are Heidi Perez and Gregory Williams. So Heidi Perez and Gregory Williams, we will send you out the 2 books. If you have a chance, you can chat us your email, or we will track you down and find you to get your address to ship it. And for anyone else interested in purchasing removing labels, at corwin.com, we will give you the code webinars to use at checkout. So you'll receive not only a 20% discount, but free shipping on the book purchase. One last thing I wanted to touch base on is that we do have Leadership by Design Institute series. The next session starts April 26th and is an implementation session on equitable culture. So for more information or to register for this Leadership by Design series, you can visit corwin.com/LBD, as in Leadership by Design series. Thank you again to the presenters, and thank you for all of you who came and gave your time and attention. We appreciate everything you do. And goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Be safe and be well.
Mm-hmm.